Okay, if everyone wants to take a seat, we'll get going here. Get started. Okay, welcome, welcome. Does everyone want to take a seat? We'll get started. You bet. Glad you can be here. Okay, welcome everyone. Glad you can be here today. We are honored to have our 3 county commissioners with us. Thank you so much. Scott Jenkins, Jim Harvey, and Gage Frower are with us. We also have a couple of ex-county commissioners behind us over here. Luinda Downs from Davis County and Jan Zogmaster, one of our members here from Weber County. Let's see, is there anyone else I'm missing here? And then, of course, our guests, we've got Ann Milner here, our senator, and from District 8, formerly District 18, now District 5. And John, what district are you from? What's the number?
Well, now it's 3.
District 3, okay.
Yeah.
It's a moving target.
We're still representing our old districts right now, but
Okay.
on different days, like I'm running for District 5.
All right.
It's a really odd time.
Well, we're glad to have our senators with us. We're expecting Mike Schultz in a few minutes too. He said he would join us. So we will start with our invocation. Pat has consented to give us the invocation and then our pledge.
I can't see anything, but I can see the microphone.
You're so
All right.
Okay,
Oh, I can see the microphones. It's going to be good
good
thing
for
on
you.
it.
Okay, here we go.
Dear Father in heaven, we're grateful to meet here today as Republican women and guests, and are grateful for the opportunity to gather together and learn and discuss. We ask thy blessings to be with us this day in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Let's fall over there.
Thanks so much, Pat. Don't trip there. Okay, Jerry Paskins is going to give us our pledge. I'll want to rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Now, if we just want to take a minute to, let's see, here's Representative Schultz. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you. We have just a little organizational minute.
And you're doing some ranching today?
Excuse me, did you have a comment? You can't hear? I will try to speak into the mic. We just have one comment. Debbie, did you want to take a minute with membership? Just a little organizational minute here.
So we are pushing membership, and thank you. We've had 3 new memberships today, and some of you are already members, but we sure would like to have more people join our forces because that's what makes us strong. And the meetings have just been amazing. And of course, with numbers, you have a little bit of power. So bring a friend, bring somebody along, really encourage membership, $40. And that helps us so that we can continue to have these meetings. Donations are always welcome. So kind of encourage your friends to come along and let's get our membership up to where it used to be. Thanks.
And just a little FYI to put this on your calendar, our next meeting will be May 9, which is not the first Monday in the month. It's the second Monday because I'm out of town. So you'll allow me that courtesy. But we have invited several members of the Hispanic political community, if you will, to come and speak to us about the factors impacting Hispanic or Latino political involvement. So we're really excited to have them come. That's May 9. And then on June 6, technically we're taking the summer off, but on June 6, we're just going to have a Zoom meeting for everybody, an organizational meeting to talk about some of the administrative things that we don't have time to talk about at our meetings, just so we can get organized for the fall. Okay, so I'll send you emails about that, but just wanted you to know. Okay, so we have our three guests here. And what I think we would like to do is maybe have each of you take 5-10 minutes, whatever you'd like, to talk about what you would like us to know about the general session, the 22 session. Yes, Jim.
Just briefly, I want to make sure that we recognize the best standard examiner employee.
Yes, we should.
Tim Vandernex, right there.
Thank you for being with us. We appreciate Tim. He takes us places we cannot go, right? Cannot otherwise go. But if you'd each take a few minutes, tell us what you'd like us to know about the session, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. I'm afraid if we start to take Q&A, we'll never finish. So give you each a few minutes to introduce yourselves and what you'd like us to know, and then we'll have some Q&A. So, but I apologize. This is not a roving mic, so I've got to have you come up.
And I'll get you on the camera too.
Okay.
Thank you, Lorraine. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. I appreciate it. So I apologize for my attire today. I had been working outside most of the week. It's that time of year where we're trying to get everything ready for the irrigation season. That's assuming we have any water, but that's the goal anyway. So I appreciate the opportunity. So my name is Mike Schultz. I have the opportunity to serve as the majority leader in the House of Representatives. This year, was my 8th session and probably going to be one of the most memorable sessions. I think we did a lot of good things this year, partly because we had a lot of money in the state of Utah, most of which was one-time money. And one-time money is not things that you use for pay raises, for ongoing appropriations and expenses. Thank you. One-time money is things where we view that, and our economists at the state view that it's not an ongoing revenue source because of all the federal money, the ARPA money that was spent around the whole nation, and especially in Utah. And because Utah has the #1 economy in the nation, we actually had a lot of extra one-time money. And so we, as a House caucus and a Senate caucus, majority caucus, got together and decided what should we, spend that large amount of one-time money on. We determined that we'd like to do it on generational investments, things that will last not just our lifetime, but our kids and our grandkids' lifetime. And a couple of the things that we came up with was water, right? Water efficiencies. We all know right now we're in the worst drought in probably 1,300 years as a state. And so we put a lot of money, $400 to $500 million into water efficiency between secondary water metering and agricultural optimization. The Great Salt Lake. This last year, it was the lowest on record. And what the Great Salt Lake does, not only for our economy, it is a huge contributor. I think it contributes close to $1.5 billion into our total economy, but also what it does for our environment. We're all familiar with the lake effects, snow, and if anybody's seen a picture of the Great Salt Lake this last year and realize it looks like a puddle compared to what it has historically, it's really concerning. We need to be really cautious on what we're doing. So we took about $50 million and set it aside to try to figure out how we can dedicate water to the Great Salt Lake, as well as some other things that we can do at the Great Salt Lake to make sure that it is coming back. Of course, we know the good man upstairs has a lot of say in that, but we need to be doing all that we can as well. Transportation, that's a big one. So we took over $1 billion, actually $1.3 billion this year, and put towards transportation, additional transportation money. And all modes of transportation, transit, active transportation, and the bulk of it went to roads. We know for quality of life, that's super important. Education. This was a big year for education. The education, public education got a 9% increase from the state this year. largest on record. And then we also passed several bills, and Ann, I think, was a sponsor of one or two of these bills that offered our teachers more flexibility and some paid time so that they can get caught up in the classrooms. We know with the pandemic, Utah let out as one of the states that was one of the first states to get our kids back to school. It was not easy on our education system and our teachers specifically. And so we as a legislature realized that and spent some time or passed a couple of bills that would give them more flexibility and more time to get caught up outside of the classroom when the kids are there. And then a $200 million tax cut, income tax cut. So that was for all Utahns. So again, I think it was a great session, one of the most memorable. So anyways, I'll turn the time over to one of my colleagues and we'll go from there. So thank you.
So I'm John Johnson, and I represent what is now District 3 in the Senate. I'm also the chair of the Senate Education Committee. So, you know, Mike already talked about some of the great things that actually happen in education in terms of increasing the budgets. But it was interesting because this was also a year where we had a large number of parents that were very concerned about things that were happening in the classroom. And I think, you know, we had a number of, I thought, really good transparency bills for education that the parents were asking for. But I think the timing of them was not quite right. I know we had, you know, a lot of press coverage on that. And I think some of these bills were a bit misinterpreted about what the intent of them was. And so I think that was a hard thing. We actually made a decision to pull a lot of those bills back. And, you know, I had a couple of my own that they actually had come to my committee, but I just tabled them for that year. I really think that the focus should be on the fact that, you know, the weighted pupil unit went up more than it ever has. There were a lot of really good things that were happening. It's interesting too, coming off the pandemic, of course, parents were very concerned about what's going on. And I think that's important to emphasize that, you know, of course they had struggles with the kids being home and they were exposed to, the parents were exposed to some of the things that were going on in the classroom and were concerned about them. And, you know, I hope to address those in the future, a little bit more of that. And one good bill, actually, I'll do a shout out to Senator Milner. Senator Milner had a bill that came through the Education Committee to improve reading. And it's a major reading program. And I think it's actually going to result in a lot of good things. When I started hearing the statistics, what was it? 49% of kids in the third grade don't read at a third grade level. And I think that's a real concern. You know, if kids aren't learning to read, you know, they can't even go into a technical school, right? They can't read the manuals that come out. And so I thought that was a really good bill, and I'm hopeful that that's going to yield big results for that. Of course, the tax cut, I think, was an important thing. That was a great bill that came out, I think. You know, although there's still some that think we should have focused on the tax on food rather than an income tax cut. But I think altogether it was a good session.
So thank you for the opportunity to be here. Yeah, I consider it, I'm Ann Milner. I do represent Senate District 18, but next time I'm actually running for Senate District 5. So we changed all the numbers and a lot of us had to go get stickers for our signs. So we didn't have to reprint our signs, but appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you. I want to hit a couple of things. So Representative Schultz reminded me, said, oh, I forgot to talk about the Social Security, the increase in the Social Security income tax increase. And we did do that in the session. We did an entire cut for across the board for everyone, but we also then added some additional Social Security tax increase so that we would take care of our most senior community. And we felt like that was extremely important in terms of making a difference here. And I think it's probably helpful contextually to know that the year before that, we gave a $100 million tax increase, but it had been targeted to specific groups. It was targeted to families with children. It was targeted to our veterans who we had been subject to state income tax. And we also, that was the first step we took in Social Security. So we had target those specifically to those groups. But this year we felt like we needed to do, again, a broad tax increase for everyone, and that's what we did. And we will continue to monitor, I think, what you see with our revenues, and all realize that if our revenues stay strong, we hope in the future to continue to make the investments we need to make in education and transportation, et cetera. But at the same time, where we can, to return tax money back to Utahns. I want to talk about maybe 2 or 3 bills, and I think you all, I'm sure, have particular areas of interest. But I think, first of all, water projects in general is high on everybody's list, and every article I see lately and notices I see kind of say, we're not where we need to be in this drought, and we need to figure out what we're going to do about that. And Representative Schultz talked about some generational projects. Those generational projects are around helping us conserve. We know that we need to conserve the water that we have. Is one element of what we need to do. Secondly, we need to help. Agriculture water is extremely important in our communities, and we want to make sure we're still able to grow our food and for our ranchers to still be able to ranch. And so finding a way that we can help our farmers do conservation as well while still being able to grow their crops is incredibly important. And then third, over time, we're going to have to think about how we develop water resources for the future. I always say we benefit from today by the pioneers and those who came before us for the reservoirs and the access to water that we have today. It's our responsibility now, while we can, to make similar investments for the future. And they're really investments for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. And some people have said, you know, why did you take the federal money? Well, a piece of that is saying we can use that one-time money to invest in generational projects that otherwise we would have to ask our Utah taxpayers to pay through Utah state taxes. And so I think it's a way of us trying to say we're not going to use it for short-term things. We're going to use it for generational projects that will benefit those who come after us. A second area is education, and I don't want to reiterate, but except to say, I think for education, we did see record funding this year for our education programs, which are extremely important to us. And in addition to that, we were able to make some specific investments around early learning literacy. I still have to talk about that bill, John. I'm sorry. Thank you, John, for talking about it. But 49% of our children in 2019 were reading at 3rd grade level at the end of 3rd grade. And if you think about how important reading is, and that's the time when people start from going from learning how to read to reading to learn everything else. And we need to make sure that our kids can read. And when only 49% are there, then it's time for us to make an investment. So we went out, I pulled together a group of experts because I don't know how to teach reading, frankly. I went out, pulled a group of experts, people who hadn't actually talked to each other and shared what they were doing, pulled them together. We worked over the the summer. People who have experience and expertise went out and studied other models. We're able to create a program that we think fits for Utah, builds on what we already have, but says, here's some things we need to do to align the work that we're doing. And then we set a really bold goal of saying in 5 years, we want to be at 70% of our third graders reading at the end of third grade. That's a really bold goal, considering during the pandemic, 2021, during the pandemic, we actually dropped to 44% of those children reading at the end of third grade. And just to remind you, there are like 50,000 kids that are in third grade right now across the state of Utah. And when you think about 25,000, close to 25,000 of them can't read at grade level at the end of third grade. What we know after that is they're 4 times more likely not to graduate from high school. We know if you go to look at prisons and you look at people that are in public assistance programs, there's a greater percentage that can't read. So let's make some investments early. Let's get our kids reading. And I had one woman who came who I didn't know at all, and she came to testify. And she was very passionate about the program. And she said, you know what? Reading is liberty. If you can't read, you don't have access to understand and know and be able to exercise the liberties that you have in this country. So I think it's incredibly important. So those are a couple of things that I think are particularly important, and we're going to need to continue to build on to make a difference in the state. And I'll let you all ask your questions so we can talk about what's important to you.
Thank you so much. I have a lot of questions myself, actually. But what we'd like to do now is maybe have you, would you mind just all coming up in front? Come up in front. And if you have a question, just stand up. We'll take turns, ask your question, give them a chance to respond. And I'll cut you off when it's time to go. Got about a half hour here. Okay?
Take you to a park.
Is this a group hug or something?
Hi, I'm Beaver Boo. I want to know what is going to happen in the legislature regarding the housing crisis. So Governor Herbert started a panel, right, to discuss the housing crisis. Now we're under Governor Cox, and I'm a lender by trade, and 60% of Utahns are priced out of the market. The Fed is going to continue to raise interest rates, and I've got darling first-time home buyers out there that are being priced out. What are your solutions?
You want me to start?
Oh, well, or yeah,
Go ahead, and I'll let you start, and then I'll.
Okay, so we did not get into this challenging situation in a very short period of time. Some of you lived through 2007, 8, 9, and we had a housing bubble at that time. If you go back and look at the data over the last 10 years, what you found is we formed more households for about 7 or 8 years in the last decade than we in fact built housing stock. Now, that has started to correct in the last 2 to 3 years, but we have got to be able to build more housing stock, and we've got to be able to support doing that in order to be able to catch up. I'm like you, I have grandchildren who really want to be able to buy a home, who at this point cannot do that. They are forced out of that market, and we've got to find a way to be able to build more affordable housing, and that will be able to support that. And I think we worked really hard during the session to try to find, this one's hard because that really is a private market piece, and we all believe in the market taking care of those issues, and I think it's starting to. But we also have a piece around zoning, et cetera, and making sure we can get affordable lots that people can build affordable homes on and get started in that first home, because that's what's really important. And if you think about it, many of you, I'm guessing, you went and bought a small little starter home someplace that was a price that you can afford, and you built some equity in that house. And then you used that, and you took the kind of the appreciation on that house and the equity that you built, you sold that one and you moved to the next one. So you have to have a place to get started in this market. And we've got to find ways of being able to build more affordable housing that probably in some cases is on smaller lots. In some cases just gives people at maybe higher density, which I know people don't like, but we've got to help, we've got to find the right way and the right balance to get this started. And then I am just going to give, I actually had a constituent, this is out there, so I had a constituent say to me, you know, I'm really worried about it because I'm worried about my grandchildren not being able to get houses. Is there something we could do about this? And he said, you know, we have all this federal land. And, you know, that made me think about the Homestead Act. It's a long time ago. So I said, you know, I wonder if we could have a different kind of Homestead Act. It's about being able to provide some land for people to be able, who would commit to building that a home on, et cetera. So I'm starting those conversations. And actually that would have to be federal. So starting to open up that conversation with some of our congressional delegation, and we'll see where that goes. So I just thought it was a really interesting idea.
So Inger, that was a great question. Couple things I'd like to point out. And one, it truly is a supply and demand issue. And that starts with local governments, local city planning and council. We all are concerned about the growth in the state, but that's the locals have control of the zoning. And so that's really the number one thing. There's several things that are contributing to the supply and demand issue, but that is the largest single one. Is there's just simply not enough zoning in the right areas for first-time home buyers. So that's one thing that the legislature has been working on, trying to push cities towards. It's really hard to get there because without taking that local control away, and we don't want to do that necessarily either. So trying to find ways to work with cities and encourage them. The couple of things I'd like to point out, we did take $50 million this year and put it towards affordable housing to create more housing stock for affordable housing. So that was one of the generational investments things we did. Representative Waldrop had a bill as well. I'm not sure who his Senate sponsor was on that bill, but Representative Andrade, Senator Andrade. They had a bill that also focused on encouraging cities to zone for more dense, for smaller lot sizes mainly, and then also around transportation hubs. And then also, I think one of the biggest things it did too is it created a reporting mechanism that all the cities have to report their housing stocks to, so that we can have an idea as to which cities are going above and beyond, and then what cities are lagging beyond, so that we can focus on the cities that are lagging behind that need to do their part. But another big thing is, again, the supply and demand. So the demand. Historically, we have been around 70% of Utah's growth has been our own kids, our kids and grandkids. When COVID hit early and people from other states started flocking to Utah, that number went down. So it's somewhere in between 50 and 60% of Utah's growth is our kids, and then it's about 40 to 50% is in migration, people coming to Utah. We certainly want to provide opportunities for our kids and grandkids to live in the state, but do we really need everybody moving here from California and other states that have been coming to Utah? And so one of the things that the legislature has done over the years is incentivize businesses to come to the state to make sure we have opportunities. Well, being the fastest growing state in the nation, number one economy, we felt as a legislature and as a state, we could pull back some of those incentives. So we worked to do just that. We worked to pull back some of those incentives. Hopefully that slows some of the growth that we're seeing from people coming in to the state, but yet doesn't pull it back enough to where it hinders our kids. It still gives our kids the opportunities to live in the state if they want. So it's top of mind. It's something that we're focused on, but really it starts with the local governments.
I guess one of the things I always look to is that, many people think that the government needs to do this or the government needs to do that. And I'm of a firm belief that sometimes it's actually the government that's the problem. I know my son is getting married this week. They had a apartment all lined up in Pleasant View. An individual has spent a considerable amount of money renovating their basement so they could rent out. And then they found out that they actually can't rent their own basement because of a city ordinance that's there. I think we need to get people involved and go to the city council meetings. I mean, there's this big problem, not in my backyard, right? Let's have this high density housing somewhere else, but you can't do that and then also say, why don't we have enough housing for young people going into it? I know they had a heck of a time. We've got a big demand shock here. You look at Northrop and the number of engineers that they brought into the Weber County area. It's no secret why there might be a big increase in demand for housing. And the other factor too is, you can't pump $2 trillion into the economy and not expect there to be some inflation from it. And especially when we're at full employment, right? We've got, around 3%, right? The employment, people are employed, that may not tell us everything because there are a large number of people that don't even enter the workforce because of incentives that they've gotten. But I think we really need to look at, in my opinion, government as the problem and start looking at the things that are keeping the housing down. I know one other thing I wanted to mention, go to North Ogden and look, and you'll find that a building permit is more than $50,000 now. How can you have affordable housing when we're doing things like that in our cities? But I really believe that is a local issue. Zoning laws should remain local, and so I think we actively should be involved in those meetings in our cities and find out what's going on.
No, I was just going to ask, Senator Milner touched a little bit on this, but the hurdles that the federal government creates, and then your inability to move forward. What about energy? We have a state that has a great wealth of energy. What can you do, or did you do, or are you in the process of doing on the state level? And then what hurdles from the federal government, like you talked about with land, are creating problems so you can't do it? Leo?
Go ahead.
So I think we're all learning that energy independence is extremely important. And we have to find a way as a nation to do that, and we should be also focusing on how we do that as a state. I will tell you that while we only have a limited amount of capability because of the state lands that we have, remember 66% of our land in the state is federally owned, which really causes us significant challenges as a state. But we are trying to support those who are doing this in a way that would make this feasible. So I spent some time a couple of years ago out in the Uinta Basin area. And one of the issues in the Uinta Basin area is, how do you get it out? How do you transport it? Because even though they can produce it, that's not sufficient. You also have to be able to transport it. A tremendous amount of work was done on an EIS to be able to put a railroad in. People in that community actually came together around that. They worked, in this case, with the federal government. They were able to get the permits to be able to build a railroad. That railroad will be privately built. So we're not putting government money in, but we paved the way for that. So that's going to take some time, but it's really important in terms of it's not just enough to have it and to have access to it, you also have to be able to transport it. And finding more ways that we can help support that, I think, is going to be really important as a state.
So that's a great question too. So as a state, we do all we can. And, we look at the state lands, every state land that we can feasibly drill on and not have an environmental impact on, we do it. And for a couple reasons. One, because we want to be energy independent. We realize how important that is, but also too, because that money goes to our school kids. And so that's a huge win, right, for the state of Utah. So we make sure at the state level, we break down all the barriers that we possibly can on state-owned property. Again, close to 65% of the property in Utah is owned by the federal government. One of the big problems was, when President Biden took office, one of the first things he did was put a ban on all federal drilling, new leases. We as a state, and as well as several other states, took the Biden administration to court. We won that lawsuit, and we can go back and drill. But the problem is they're holding us up on permits now. So even though their leases are out there, they still say they're given leases. Good luck trying to get a permit to do that. So it's something that's constant battle. We recognize it. We as a state do all we can to push back on it. It is super important. And as Ann mentioned, the things that are going on in the world right now, we don't need to get into, but I think it really drives home the importance that we need to be as energy independent as we possibly can and not rely on foreign countries.
Yeah, in addition to that decrease in permits, you also, you have to ask why one of the first acts as President Biden actually put an end to the Keystone Pipeline, but yet promoted a pipeline in the Soviet Union. I mean, that is not moving towards being energy independent. And we have to be mindful. I mean, as a conservative, it's important that we conserve our planet, right? And so I think environmental issues are important, but we have to weigh those off versus meeting the needs today. And if you look at some of the laws that are passed across I always come back to this point of let's look where government is the problem rather than looking to government to be the solution. In my experience, I was trained as an economist. I've always believed that markets work, and so if markets aren't working, you need to say, well, why aren't they working? What is standing in the way? And this permitting thing was a big deal. Shutting down that pipeline was a big deal. But we have to look at other things and say, where are the problems with regulation or other things? I mean, one of the things that Senator Milner worked on, I thought, was this idea of a sandbox where we can kind of get some of the regulation out of the way and allow businesses to do new things. Of course, that had a limitation on environmental concerns, but we have a lot of oil in this state, a lot of unique oil that isn't being drilled for right now, and I think we need to look at ways for that to happen.
Question for you. So what is the strategy and plan to help us conserve water? Can you give us more details as to what you guys have decided in regards to helping us conserve water?
Anybody else want to start first? I mean,
So yeah, a couple of things. A couple of the big things. I'll just hit on some of the larger things. One of the things, and it was Senator Iamoto had a bill that reduces how much water comes out of the shower heads with technology today. You can actually get a pretty good stream and with less water. Urinals, less in urinals for men. We reduced how much water those urinals can use. We talked about toilets. There was some concerns about toilets, honestly, so we decided not to go with the toilets. We think that's really important when you flush, that it goes down and not have to flush it 2 or 3 times to get it down, because you're defeating the purpose at that point in time. But I think a couple of the biggest things. So we spent all summer with members from the Senate and the House, and then also with the governor's office, looking at what's the biggest things. A couple of the biggest things. One is secondary water metering. So the majority of secondary water in the state is not metered. Studies show that, and Weber Basin did this about 10 years ago. They started installing, maybe 12 years ago, installing water meters. And without adjusting pricing or anything like that, just simply showing people how much water they use versus their neighbors or versus somebody else, showed a 25 to 30% reduction in water use. So that was one of the biggest things. The second biggest thing is agricultural community has 70% of the water in this state to grow crops. We're probably, the agriculture community is probably the most inefficient in the nation, or sorry, with water. Meaning it takes a lot of water to irrigate the ground, whereas if they go in and do sprinklers and new types of irrigation and pipe ditches and things like that, then they can actually use less water and then having more water available. So those are two of the biggest things. So we put about $100 million, if I remember right, into agricultural optimization to help farmers and ranchers pipe ditches and put sprinklers in to use less water, which would leave more water in the rivers.
I know one thing that I pushed for that is a problem here in Weber County, in Ogden City. I don't know if you're aware, but there's a number of the wells that are used for the water here in the city, and we have a pipe that's coming out of Pineview that's over 100 years old and leaks more water than we'll probably save from the metering. So I was glad to see that they stepped up, and I know they're going to use some of the COVID money and stuff to at least start addressing that issue. This is a 36-inch pipe where part of it is wood, and it's been leaking more water than we use. So, I mean, there's things like that we should be looking at.
Yes, there is. That's very controversial.
The
West,
hardest bill to pass in the legislature is a change to
Yeah.
water policy.
and it's not just,
Darn.
it is not just unique to Utah. Any Western state, right? Utah's the second driest state in the nation. Water laws are very, very difficult to change because, what happens 30 or 40, 50 miles, 60 miles east of here affects down here, and what happens here affects the Great Salt Lake. And so it is not as easy as one might think to do that. But yes, currently, if and that was another thing too that we did this year, where we allowed those people, instead of losing that water. So you mentioned, so if you haven't used the water for 7 years, there's some extensions and things that you can apply for. Then you lose the water. And so, like Lorraine pointed out, it is use it or lose it type thing. And so it does encourage people to use water when they don't need it. But I mentioned the Great Salt Lake. One of the things that we do, those people now that are not using their water can lease it to the state. And the state will send it directly to the Great Salt Lake. So that is one of the things that there's some options there now that wasn't there before. Water banking is also being talked about too, to where people can, and that did pass a couple of years ago, although there's no local entities that have that up and going yet. But Weber Basin will be one of the first ones, and I believe they're starting that this year, to where let's say somebody has excess water, they can lease it to Weber Basin Water for a certain amount of time. So there are a couple things that address that specifically, but there are some things that we probably need to do and talk about. That there is a task force that was just formed this year to look at some of these laws.
Coming out of college next year, and he tells me mom and can't afford to help families educate. And that's the reality of it. Housing being what it is, and all the inflation all goes on, the cost of living. How much of that 9% you talked about goes to teachers? Because that's really where we need it. I also have a situation in elementary school this last fall. They don't have enough third grade teachers. They're actually going out and talking to some of the retired teachers in our community, seeing if they should talk them to coming back. They've got a tremendous problem.
So I'm gonna let, and I'll just talk really high level. So the legislature's recognized that for the last 3 or 4 years. We have increased education spending record amounts almost every year, even during the pandemic when we were cutting budgets. Utah still increased education spending, only state in the nation to do that. If you talk to a teacher today, and if you actually look at the numbers and wait till they come out again, we're actually middle of the pack, maybe even upper end of the pack on what we pay our teachers. So a lot of that has changed just over the last 3 years.
Go ahead.
So some of you remember the conversation around Amendment G. And Amendment G was really an amendment that says we use our income tax money for education, but we asked to have a little bit more flexibility and to open that up so we could use it for children and people with disability. And that was a flexibility piece that we needed because income tax is growing much more rapidly in the state than general fund. Because general fund is pretty much sales tax. And if you think about it, we've changed our buying habits. We used to go buy the lawnmower and mow the lawn. Now what we do is we pay for a service to mow the lawn for us. And we don't collect it on our services, we collect it on our goods, which means it's not growing as fast. So but that funds everything that's not education. So if you think about some of the human services, if you think about public safety, if you think about our parks, if you think about any other part of government, it's really funded by that fund. But what we did do is say, but people kind of held on to that and said, because it's earmarked, we're afraid of losing that. But what we didn't have was a funding framework for education. We had the traditional WPU, but every year we kind of made decisions about funding for education. So we had a revenue source, but we didn't have a budgeting framework for it. Well, we attached a bill to Amendment G that says if this is enacted, we are going to put together a funding framework that makes sure in the base budget every year, we will fund a cost of the basic cost of living increase as well as growth in public education. That will be done in the base budget, which means it comes off it comes out first before it has to compete with everything else. You're doing the basics. The second thing we did is say we need, because if you look at like the last 20 years in public education, what you'd find is that funding continues to go up until there's a downturn in the economy. And then we cut everybody's budget, including public education. It takes public education 3 or 4 years to get back to where they were. So when we do that, we find ourselves always behind the curve. What this did too was to also set up a public education stabilization fund. And that really is an ongoing fund it's used like a rainy day fund that we're keeping. We'll spend one time for public education in years that we don't need it. But if there is a downturn, we'd be able to go in and pull the money, that ongoing money from that public education stabilization fund, and be able then to not have to cut public education's budget, which I think allows us to keep the trajectory going up and not to have these dips that it takes us so long to recover from. So we're doing a really conservative way in that we put together a funding framework. We have a public education stabilization fund that allows us to save. We have been able to fully fund that public ed stabilization fund in the last couple of years, which is absolutely amazing, but it's been a priority for us to make sure that happens. And then we appropriated additional money to public education beyond that. And a lot of that was focused. So we had a 6% WPU. A lot of that goes to teachers. But in addition to that, beyond that, we also put money out there for professional development days or hours for teachers. We know that they are working on doing prep work, et cetera. A number of years ago, in one of the cuts, we took those days away. We are using some one-time money to put that back in for a couple of years. So we give teachers the flexibility, particularly coming out of the pandemic when they just had to work so hard. We also put a little bit of money into all the teachers that were asked to pick up extra assignments because a teacher would get sick and we couldn't get a substitute, and teachers would be picking up extra assignments and doing extra things. We put some one-time money to be able to go back and support them and help them in that way. And then the final piece is we wanted to help with some of their the school facility pieces, particularly, and making sure we've addressed the safety issues in our schools. So we put some one-time money in that. And I know teachers really care about that. They care about the support for that. So those are the kinds of things. Part of that's just going to take time, but we are above Idaho now, by the way. So we spent a long time kind of saying we're at the bottom, but we actually are moving in the right trajectory. And if we continue to stay the course here, I think we can make a difference for public education.
I wanted to add one more thing there. I think what Senator Milner was talking about is real important. And if you think about the nature of the economy is very cyclical, okay? And what we found is that tax revenues coming from income are cyclical too, okay? And so part of what Senator Milner was talking about was we didn't have a mechanism where we could say, you know, the start of this thing, we talked about one-time money versus ongoing money. Okay, when you have a revenue source that's very cyclical, you know, how are you going to budget so that continues? If you give an increase in salary, that increase has to be ongoing, right? Because you can't when we have a downturn, we're not going to take money away from the teachers, right? As the economy's falling. And so, you know, part of the idea of shifting some of the income tax money onto sales tax, which is actually more stable, okay, that tends to be fairly stable source of revenue for the government. So moving those things between each other allowed us to do more ongoing spending as far as teacher salaries and stuff. And so I think a lot of people don't understand that. They think we just stole money from what was supposed to be education funding, right? But what we were trying to do is balance that cyclical thing so we could offer higher salaries, we could provide ongoing money. And then the other thing she mentioned was the idea that, you know, when the economy is going really well, we bank some of that money and use that. And we weren't able to do that before.
I'll take water.
Okay.
Guys.
Go.
CRT.
No, I didn't hear part of it. Tell me that question again on. Okay. I think they pointed to me because I happen to have had a bill on that this session that didn't pass. But I actually have been really concerned about this subject. And, from what I was hearing from the press, this doesn't exist in Utah. It's not being taught. And I would say, the theory, when you talk about critical race theory, the critical theory part of it, I would say, yes, that's not being taught in K through 12 classrooms, but the praxis or what comes out of that and what people do, I think very much exists. I have a documentary on critical race theory at a site called identitymarxism.com. So identitymarxism.com, and we brought experts from all over the country. We talked to the parents in Loudoun County, Virginia, right, where that basically turned Virginia into a red state. And we also interviewed hundreds of people in Utah and got stories from them. We didn't put all of them in the movie. And one of the reasons for that is we had a number of teachers that we didn't want to have backlash against and children. And so that wasn't put in there. But I would say, yes, it does exist in Utah. I think it's a problem. It's a problem in that the whole focus, it's a worldview, right? So you say every problem I need to look through a lens of racism. Okay, why don't we in this country look through a lens of liberty, right? What went right about our country and where do we still have problems? I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on race issues, but that doesn't need to be the lens we look at every problem through. And, consequences of that, I think, are enormous. I would encourage you to go watch that movie if you're interested in that topic.
So I'll answer the water question, then I'll let Senator Milner get into the third grade reading. So it was, and I can't remember exact numbers, but it was right around $500 million is what we invested as a state. About half of that, $250 million, went into secondary water metering all across the state. About $100 million of that went towards water agricultural optimization, one of the things that we talked about. So goes towards piping ditches, putting sprinkler systems in, different things that using new technologies to be more efficient with the water. And then also about $50 million roughly went towards rural drinking water companies, and that doesn't necessarily have a specific tie to it, other than all these small rural drinking water companies are small; they don't have a lot of revenue, and so it gives them the opportunity to upgrade and use more efficiency practices inside their water companies. And then yes, I can't remember, it was somewhere around $150 million we set aside for future water development projects, such as reservoirs or another dams or other things. It would be nice to get that moisture first. We need that moisture, because really right now there's not a lot, at least on the northern end of the state. Our reservoirs are pretty well empty, and if we had another reservoir, it would be empty as well. But it's certainly something that we need in the future. We recognize that, and I think there's about another $150 million that was set aside for that.
So, Lael, I just want to make sure, was your last question about third grade reading? Okay. Okay, so I'd be happy to talk about that. So first of all, I just want to say we tried very hard around water to take a balanced approach, because this is going to be important. Utah grew 18.5% in the last decade. We are going to continue to grow in the future. The most significant limiting factor that is going to be water. So we have to be thoughtful, and we have to think long-term, generational about that. and make sure that we're thinking about the development of resources, the conservation of resources, but also making sure that we take care of our agricultural communities, because talk about wanting to be energy independent. We want to be food independent as well. And we want to make sure that our ranchers and our folks that are growing crops are able to do that, and we can supply our needs in the state of Utah. So it really does take forward long-term thinking to do that. Then third grade reading. What we did is to say, first of all, third grade reading is not, if you can't read at the end of third grade, it's not the third grade teachers. This is something that starts in kindergarten. And in kindergarten and in first grade and in second grade and in third grade, we need to be continuing to see how our children are doing. What I didn't know is I don't know about you, but many of you probably just, your parents went home and they read books to you, or they had you read books. But what we know about reading now is some kids can't read for other kinds of reasons other than just not reading. It's an encoding problem. It's a dyslexics problem. In fact, I was talking to someone the other day, and she said, I have a child that has one child with each of those problems. And what solves that is not the same thing. So if we just keep doing the same thing with those children, we're just going to keep getting the same results. So what this does is to say, let's figure out where that child is having difficulty, what the specific underlying issue is. Then let's sit down with parents, and let's say to parents, here's what the difficulty your child is having. Here's something you can do to help them with home. And then let's build this whole raft of resources that are available to every parent, every child, every teacher in the state. Because we can put them online and make them available to everybody. We have UETN, which is our own state network. We can make those resources available. But what we can say to a parent is, what's going to help your child best are these two kind of exercises that you could do with your child, the support you could provide. And then sometimes we know that some children, maybe their parents don't speak. English is not their first language, so they have difficulty. Let's make sure those after-school programs that we have access to all those same resources so they can help support the child. Let's make this both something where the child and the teacher working with the parents and working with the community can provide the support, but it's on a differentiated basis. And then the second thing it did is say, let's provide some additional instructional coaches for low performing schools. We know some schools the kids are, up here performing high. Let's provide literacy coaches, and we're going to put those in the lower performing schools. And then as the school gets there and kind of they master it, then we can move them to another school. So we're not trying to say, let's put them in every school, but let's help them get started. And then once they're started, we'll move them to the next school and the next school. And then the third thing it does is say, what I didn't know is we probably only have like 4 or 5 people who are really called reading specialists in the state. And you know what? We're not producing them out of our teacher education programs. We need to do something about that. And so we said, we're going to provide some funding, but they have to be kind of these reading specialist positions that you're hiring. And we'll give you 75%, but the institution has to come up with 25%. We want to make sure they've got skin in the game as well. And that's what their tuition piece of that would be. But let's make sure we are teaching the teachers right now who will be our future teachers. Because right now what we're having to do is a lot of professional development with those teachers. And so let's work upstream. So that's what that bill did. Tried to be a very systematic approach to trying to make a difference here. Kindergarten to third grade, people say to me, wait a minute, what about my 4th grader? And what I say is, if we can start in K through 3, it's a really good start. I understand that issue goes on, but we can't just do it all at once. So let's get started at K through 3 and let's make a difference for those kids. Because if they can read at the end of 3rd grade, we all know there are so many places to learn things these days. I mean, it's not just in school, but you have to be able to read to do that and to access those resources. And for me, that's what this allows you to do. And it's really aligning teachers, students, parents, and community around that effort.
Thank you so much. If you have any time to stay with people, I know there are more questions. Would you also mind kind of getting together so our student examiner representative can take a picture with you together? Okay, we would do that. Okay, Tim, this is for you. They saw you were trying to catch, so I just want to make sure you have a chance. Okay, well, thank you all for being here today.
Did you go?
Do you have anything that you want to-
I feel underdressed for sure right now.
You'll be the star.
Yeah, there you go. You should.
That's
Would you
kind
like my jacket?
of, that's kind of your stick, isn't it? He wants people to know that he actually works really.
Well, we appreciate all you do.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.